The forward operating base in Afghanistan buzzed with its usual pre-dawn tension by 0500 hours, metal doors clattering shut behind each arriving soldier. Sergeant Megan Calloway adjusted her tactical vest and tucked her sidearm into her thigh holster, standing near the back of the mission briefing room just left of the water cooler. She didn't lean against the wall or cross her arms. She simply stood watching the screen at the front cycle through heat maps and terrain overlays. Most of the tactical data had been built from files Megan recognized intimately. She had helped construct the original patrol routes months ago, walking point on reconnaissance missions they now called Devil's Corridor. Every angle of approach, every trigger point buried in the intelligence, she knew them all. But this morning her name wasn't even on the combat roster. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The names of the assigned operators scrolled across the left panel in bright white text. Ryan Hammer Daniels, Sarah Vixen Mitchell, Jason Reaper Collins. Each name carried a color-coded timestamp and designated patrol sector. Megan's name had been there earlier that week, tagged as intelligence support. Now it was gone. Across the room, Ryan lifted a protein shake to his lips and said something to Sarah under his breath. She laughed without turning her head. Jason stood a few steps in front of them, reviewing his loadout on a tablet screen, his tone louder than necessary. If we don't establish proper fields of fire on the first ridge, we may as well stay behind the wire. That corridor is too narrow otherwise. You'll end up pinned down without support. One of the younger soldiers nearby nodded like he understood. Megan didn't move. She had heard it all before. The shape of Devil's Corridor required not just firepower and entry tactics, but a pressure hold at the choke point for a full minute longer than what most combat teams could manage, without being flanked or losing their position. The terrain alone wasn't the challenge. It was sustaining through the firefight while keeping defensive perimeters and offensive capabilities in perfect balance. At the front of the room, Captain Wilson, short and steady-voiced, adjusted his mic. Final mission briefing begins in 15 minutes. Devil's Corridor infiltration profile is set with live intelligence updates. All teams must maintain defensive posture at all primary locations to complete the mission. If you drop coverage or pull back early, the Taliban will breach the corridor. You'll get one attempt. No one looked toward Megan. She didn't expect them to. Lieutenant Andrea Morris, with blonde hair tied in a tight bun, passed by without a word and slipped a printout into Megan's hand. Megan unfolded it slowly. It was a terrain model of the corridor path, the kind she had annotated herself back when they were still mapping potential Taliban movement through the low mountain passes. It had no author listed. No one ever attached her name to those sheets. "Observe only today," Andrea murmured, keeping her voice low enough not to carry. "They've got you at observation post 4. No radio, just eyes on." Megan nodded once, then folded the sheet again and slipped it into her vest's front panel. Andrea gave a faint apologetic shrug, then moved back toward the command console. Around them, the room continued its practiced energy. Sarah dropped into a chair near the front and kicked her boot up against the table leg. Ryan offered Jason a stick of gum, and the two of them traded half-jokes about the dust throwing off weapon sights. The jokes weren't funny, but they carried status. Wilson resumed. "Heads up. Communications will go dark for approximately 12 seconds during the mountain pass traverse. You'll be moving blind through the choke point. That's when most teams lose position." Megan had written that timing. She remembered the exact communication blackout rate in the intel logs. She'd matched it against 6 real-world patrol records and adjusted the approach vectors herself. It wasn't a glitch. It was the reality of the terrain. But none of them knew that. The screen flashed the first call sign. Jason's name paired with Echo Team, deployment at 0700, secondary at 0715, all others to follow standard interval. Wilson's voice remained calm. "Support personnel report to observation posts. If you're not assigned a radio, remain off-channel." Megan turned and walked toward the hallway before anyone could point her out. Her boots made no more noise than anyone else's, but the silence around her seemed different. Not dramatic, just complete. The observation post wasn't far. A quarter-mile walk across gravel and temporary matting, past a line of blast barriers stacked low against the edge of the patrol route. The air was cool, dry, the wind too thin to carry scent. Megan kept her eyes forward. Two communications specialists passed her going the opposite direction, one of them holding a satellite phone like it was hot. Neither looked up. When she reached the observation tent, no one greeted her inside. A row of folding chairs faced a wide viewport with the distant mountain pass visible through reinforced glass. There were scopes on pivot mounts. Long lens cameras pointed toward the valley where the patrol would execute. Megan took a seat near the far end and opened the printout again. Her pen was tucked in her sleeve pocket. She made a small mark near the left edge, noting the shift in sun angle since the terrain modeling had been logged. Her handwriting was small and exact. It didn't matter if anyone saw it. No one would ask. Outside, a shadow passed low and fast over the tent's ceiling. Someone had started their Humvee patrol early. Megan didn't flinch. She looked down at the profile sheet one more time, then folded it neatly and tucked it under her leg. There was no radio laid out for her, no communications line, no identifier on the clipboard. She didn't need any of it. The corridor wasn't theoretical for her. It never had been. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had walked it quietly, alone, and now, as the chatter built through the tent walls, as the rumble of the first patrol vehicles hummed through the floor, she let herself blink once. Then she waited, knowing that in less than an hour, everything would change. The Combat Simulation Center had come to life before sunrise, long before the scheduled training teams arrived. Fluorescent lights in the tactics bay buzzed with their usual low electric hum, casting pale halos across the polished floor. Megan always arrived by 043, no badge swipe, no official check-in. Andrea, the night shift supervisor, had long since stopped asking questions. The access keycard was left under a tactical console each day, tucked into the lip of a diagnostic tray. Unspoken. It was a quiet allowance between two people who understood the difference between being included and being necessary. Megan stepped into Base 6 with a calm that came from ritual. The combat simulator was identical to the real deployment zone interface, every terrain feature mapped, every resistance point precise to real-world tolerances. She settled in without ceremony. The door sealed behind her with a soft hydraulic pull. Darkness took over for a moment, broken only by the blue pulse of the tactical display initializing. She didn't flinch. She never did. The system accepted her Ghost ID without delay. Her screen blinked once, then welcomed a blank operator tag. No rank, no name, just the number she always entered at the prompt, 427. She had used it for weeks now. The logs fed straight into the archive, unfiled. No one had flagged it. Megan adjusted her tactical gear slightly, tighter at the shoulders, then ran a warm-up scenario at medium difficulty. The display pressure indicators rolled clean, no feedback warnings. She tracked the corridor arc on the terrain model overlay. 45 seconds entry to choke point. Defensive position required at 27 seconds. Hostile exposure for less than 5. She didn't blink. Her first run of the day was methodical, clean. A slight deviation at the rear security corridor. She corrected on the second run. She leaned the angle 3 degrees tighter at the mountain ridge. Focused her field of fire. The display flashed yellow at the high-risk zone. She smiled faintly, then adjusted her approach vectors by 0.5%. By the fifth run, she held position for 90 seconds at the choke point. The security corridor stayed blue throughout the simulation. The hostile targets stayed contained until the final arc dropped them completely. In a real-world scenario, that would be a successful mission. She wanted more. Each session ran between 1 and 2 hours. She left no notes. She saved the tactical files directly to her drive, which fit inside a case small enough to tuck behind her vest's chest plate. The tactical data held everything: ammo expenditure, breath rhythm under stress, micro-corrections to her firing position during enemy contact. Every run had a profile. Every profile had a flaw, except the last one. That one was perfect. In the quiet that followed her sessions, she often walked the length of the empty locker corridor, just once, letting her eyes fall on the untouched name patches and framed commendation boards. There were no boards with her name. There were no ribbons to mark tactical breakthroughs or defense timing records. The simulation room never gave applause, but the numbers did not lie. She ran a pen along the inside of her gear bag and checked the printed overlays one more time. The final sheet, annotated with her tight scroll in dark ink, held her best run. Full defensive position held for 92 seconds. Security never broken. Mission complete. She hadn't signed it. She never did. The data itself told the story. One morning, during a double scenario analysis, Megan noticed someone standing just outside the simulation bay window. A younger systems officer named David was holding a diagnostic slate, watching her tactical readouts scroll in real time. His eyes followed the shifting defense markers as if he understood what he was seeing. She didn't pause the run. She held through the peak engagement, let the extraction timing play out, and exited clean. When the simulation bay opened and she stepped out, David didn't speak. He just nodded once, low and slow, then walked away. He never brought it up again. Back in her locker space, Megan kept her things ordered by necessity, not vanity. Her name was etched faintly on the inside seam of her duffel, not printed, just carved there with a blunt stylus. A memory stick hung from a loop of green paracord. It held all 37 Devil's Corridor runs. She plugged it in every night. She reviewed the analytics line by line. She had no instructors. She corrected herself. Her gloves, folded and tucked into the side panel, had creases now at the index fingers, where she had gripped the weapon too tightly during early drills. She had learned to let that go. You couldn't fight the corridor. You had to work with it. Let your breath fall into sync with the rhythm. Let your lungs follow the pattern. She had memorized the moment when panic tried to creep in. It was not about toughness. It was about timing. Oxygen, angle, blink rate, muscle release. She mapped it like a pulse chart. Andrea once left a small packet of electrolyte powder near the simulation panel. No note. Just the packet. It was lemon lime. Megan took it without a word and never mentioned it. On her way out, she left a tactical readout behind, labeled, quote, Simrun 427, Corridor Defense 26. Andrea never filed it, but she kept it. They both knew what it meant. The official combat teams never asked for outside data. When Ryan or Sarah reviewed their mission plans, they used only the default approaches. They practiced for 60-second holds, maybe 65 on a strong day. Megan watched them deploy loose in the entry corridor, trusting automated support to keep them from being overrun. She had run the corridor tighter than the approach allowed, twice, and survived both runs without automated weapon assistance. That detail never made it to briefing. In the end, she didn't train for approval. She trained because the mission demanded it. There were no shortcuts inside a hostile corridor. You either held it clean, or you failed. You either understood the shape of the battlefield, or you watched your team collapse before the extraction point. There was no middle ground. She knew that space better than anyone. She had built her way through it one silent morning at a time. And no one saw her. Not then. Not yet. But the corridor remembered. And so did the numbers. Inside the command tent, tension had begun to override rhythm. The air was still cool, but the mood was heating fast. Operators leaned over their terminals, tracking hostile movements and projected force deployments. Everything was being logged in real time. Each patrol thread a possibility weaving through the larger mission. A bank of monitors showed multi-angle feeds, ground-level views, aerial overlays, and security perimeters that pulsed green, then yellow, then red. Captain Wilson stood with his headset tilted just above one ear, his voice steady but clipped. He watched the deployment window flash, counting down the intercept window with quiet urgency. This was the point in the mission where either the defensive strategy worked or the Taliban breached the security line. Devil's Corridor wasn't a tactical flourish. It was the only approach fast enough to cut off a flanking maneuver at the choke point. That was the reality, and it was already starting to slip. Echo team approaching choke point, someone called out. That was Jason's unit. His squad was mid-corridor, diving into the narrow passage at speed steady, but just at the edge of control. From the helmet cam, his jaw was tight, his eyes flicked left, then blinked twice, too long. "Hostiles closing from the east," said a second voice. "Perimeter weakening," Wilson muttered into his headset. On screen, Jason's tactical readings jumped. The defense arc bent early. His team's vitals spiked. He tried to hold the position steady. Multiple hostiles, western approach. Visual confirmation of technical vehicles. "They're overrun," said Wilson. The screen flickered. Jason's team ejected from the corridor, the system logged it as a tactical retreat, and his squad feed switched to evacuation protocol. His position in the corridor was already compromised by the time anyone looked up from the console. Silence took over the room for just a moment, then Sarah keyed in from the secondary position. "Vixen team moving to support, rolling hot." Her tone was confident, maybe too confident. Her entry speed was high, aggressive, but the angle was off. She hit the corridor late, forcing the tactical system to compress the vertical approach early. "She's wide. Security breach at corridor 3. Correction impossible. Force ratio out of balance." "Extraction timeline?" someone asked. 4 minutes. She's missed it. The red flash on Sarah's tactical display triggered early. She had overshot her position. Her team ended in a defensive fallback with no secure perimeter. Another failure. Wilson looked at the screen that showed remaining assigned teams. Only Ryan remained. His call sign, Hammer 1, was already transmitting. Hammer 1, active, entry point secured. He came in smooth, right on the vector Megan had walked months ago. His tactical approach was stable, not aggressive, but enough to secure the corridor cleanly. He had the defense perimeter in view, but it was shallow. "Vertical approach unstable," Davis said. "Hold the line," someone muttered. Then Ryan's voice came over the channel, low and measured. "I'm pulling back. Too many hostiles." The security perimeter dissolved. The defensive position flattened. He dropped altitude and throttled out. "What was that?" Wilson asked. "I wasn't about to lose my team chasing an impossible corridor," Ryan answered. "No secure hold," a tech confirmed. The Taliban force breached the threshold. On screen, the mission logged a security breach. The virtual enemy crossed into the inner defense zone. Fail. No secondary teams available. No operators left in position. Wilson exhaled through his teeth. The abort light began to pulse on the control panel. Operators exchanged looks. The mission had been built with an override buffer, but it would trigger a full tactical failure unless someone re-entered the corridor in less than 60 seconds. No one was cleared. Andrea, standing near the peripheral monitor, checked the file status. Every official team was locked out. The next reset window wasn't for another 20 minutes. Wilson reached toward the abort switch. That was when the static broke. A voice, steady and quiet, entered the comm line. "I have the corridor." The operators all looked up at once. The voice hadn't come from any of the deployed teams. There was no operator listed as active. The comm line blinked green from observation post 4. Wilson pressed his headset tighter. "Say again." Megan's voice came through clearer this time. "I said I have the corridor." "Who is this?" Another controller snapped. "You're not cleared." "That zone's observer only." "Hostile force has breached level 1, Megan said. "I'm already engaged." At first, no one responded. The tactical display began to populate a new heat signature coming in low from the left flank of the terrain map. It wasn't scheduled. It didn't match any call sign. It rode the exact entry arc required for Devil's Corridor, but tighter, lower. The combat readings began to stack. "Who authorized this deployment?" Wilson barked. "There's no clearance logged." The heat signature registered as Ghost 4. "Who the hell is Ghost 4? A tech asked. The telemetry fed into the mainframe, clean, uncorrupted. The movement matched the corridor parameters. The tactical overlay showed a sharp defensive position, high-intensity contact nearing overwhelming force and climbing. "Ghost 4. Identify yourself," Wilson said. No reply. The screen showed the entry complete, defensive position acquired. "She's in the corridor," Andrea whispered. Nobody moved. Ghost 4's defense curved precisely into the compressed segment of the terrain model. the same place Jason's team had been overrun. The contact intensity rose again, Taliban forces mounting to 100, then 200, then nearly 400 fighters. The defensive line came on screen, held steady, full containment. "She's holding," said David from behind the analytics table. "She's actually holding against overwhelming force." The abort light froze. The operator who had reached for the switch stepped back. Ghost 4 held position through the final corridor. The extraction protocol triggered from the helicopter landing zone. The mission's protocol engaged. Inside the tactical system, the red beacon showed hostile disruption, then collapse. The Taliban forces neutralized. Silence filled the command tent. Wilson looked around the room. What just happened? No one answered. Every team was in retreat. Every controller still had their headset in place. The mission log updated once more, showing a completed defense under call sign Ghost 4. Ryan leaned in over the edge of the screen and said it, not loud, but not soft either. Who the hell was that? The tactical signature faded. The room stayed quiet. And somewhere over the terrain grid, Megan's voice clicked out of the channel. No fanfare. No command call. Just one final line. Returning to base. In the observation post at OP4, Megan's chair sat empty, still warm. Her printout was gone, but everyone in the command tent had heard her voice, had watched the impossible happen on their screens. Someone had just held Devil's Corridor perfectly, and they had no idea who. The terrain opened in a silent sweep below her, its jagged contours rendered in harsh reality against the Afghan sky. Megan's position cut through it low, almost hugging the valley floor with her body, riding the entry arc at an angle too shallow for most soldiers to stabilize. Her weapon sight blinked red across the top edge, pressure mounting, wind offset registering sharp right, contact window approaching. Inside the command tent, operators stared at the tactical feed in growing stillness. Ghost 4 had no listed operator, no pre-filed approach, yet the signal was clean. Her entry was optimal, defensive position steady from the moment her signature appeared on the screen. Nothing faltered. The approach she took traced the inside curve of Devil's Corridor, tighter than any recorded patrol to date, said Andrea from her station, her voice low, almost reverent. Wilson didn't reply. He was watching the contact indicator, tracking the numbers rising faster than expected. Taliban forces, 150, 200, 250. Megan adjusted position with the subtlest correction, pulling into the high-pressure segment of the corridor with surgical precision. Her left hand nudged the M249 machine gun barrel down just enough to edge the firing angle into the perfect zone. The warning pulsed again. Hostile threshold 300 fighters, no shake in the weapon, no waver in breath rate. Her vitals held flat, steady. 350 hostiles. Inside the corridor, the terrain wrapped tighter. Most soldiers would have retreated. Her vision stayed sharp, her position perfect around the rocky outcrop, the oxygen regulator feeding just fast enough to counteract the adrenaline creeping in at the edges of her consciousness. 400 Taliban fighters. She held it. The security cone on her tactical display turned solid blue. In the telemetry stream, the phrase "perimeter secure true" blinked on 3 separate feeds. Megan's position reached the apex of the corridor with flawless control. Her body shifted slightly, timing the movement with a pre-mapped thermal draft built into the valley months ago. She knew it was there. She had walked it herself, buried in the parameters to mimic real-world physics. No one else had noticed. 300 meters from the extraction point, she triggered a precise defensive pattern. The bright streaks of tracer rounds cut across the visual feed, trailing in an arc just inside the security envelope. The Taliban forces responded immediately. Their protocol flared, defensive systems engaged. They began to break formation. The enemy scattered, lost cohesion, and retreated. Inside the command tent, the red threat indicator blinked once, then vanished. Neutralized. No casualties to friendly forces. No further action required. Someone let out a breath. Another operator whispered, "What was that?" No one answered. Megan didn't wait for confirmation. Her extraction proceeded with clean efficiency. Helicopter touchdown precise. Boarding smooth. Engine heat bloomed across the thermal map in an even wave. She didn't rush. She didn't show off. She simply moved. The silhouette of her helicopter broke through the upper cloud layer as the mission sequence closed. From the outside, it looked like a simple exit. No trail of fire, no sweeping bank, just a single Black Hawk climbed through the morning mist rotors level. Inside her tactical position, the display cooled to green. Pressure dropped. Her vitals stayed unchanged. She had not spoken once. In the telemetry archive, the word complete logged beside her run. A single line. Operator ID, Ghost 4. Contact intensity, extreme. Lock duration, full. Outcome, successful defense. Override protocol, not triggered. Inside the command center, the remaining operators who had watched their own runs collapse into failure stood in silence. Ryan stared at the screen, jaw tight. Jason was still seated on the edge of the secondary terminal, his headset hanging from his fingers. Sarah didn't say a word. "She held it," someone said from the back. Wilson crossed his arms. No one else even came close. David, who had slipped in halfway through the run, tapped the telemetry line and zoomed in on the engagement timing. "Look at that." She engaged precisely 7 seconds before the corridor narrowed. Right at the edge. She didn't flinch. 400 Taliban, Andrea said. "And she stopped them all," David replied. "She made the entire force retreat." In the air, Megan's helicopter banked slightly toward the right vector, aligning with a soft return path. Her voice never entered the comms again. No request for debrief. No demand for validation. One operator leaned toward the radar screen and whispered, "Who was that?" No one had an answer. The deployment board still showed her as unassigned. Her name didn't appear anywhere official. But the signature was there. The defense was real, and it had happened in full view of every system running. Wilson stepped back from the screen and let the data speak. The log remained untouched. The outcome couldn't be challenged. She had done it. She had solved it. Live. In the corner of the room, someone replayed the corridor defense on split screen. Megan's angle through the choke point played out again. A perfect arc against the rugged terrain, the Taliban forces reacting too late, a streak of light, a signal collapse, and then just sky. Outside, the early morning light pressed faintly through the tinted glass of the command center. The clouds were starting to rise, casting soft shadows over the landing pad. A single helicopter trail marked the air above the corridor. No one knew where she had come from, but everyone knew what she had done. The impossible had just happened, and they had all witnessed it. The tactical archive was still running a full diagnostic when David pulled the telemetry feed from the mainframe. He stood over the terminal, eyes locked on the stream of clean data scrolling upward in green text. No lag. No interference. Every detail fed back into the record, as if it had always been there, except the name. The call sign was Ghost 4. Operator ID, blank. Clearance, none. Completion, 100. 0%. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at the defensive metrics, watching the line labeled Contact Duration stay flat all the way through 400 enemy fighters sustained. No instability. No retreat signal. Ryan pushed past him, half angry, half confused. "Pull the override. That run wasn't cleared. We don't know who deployed." David didn't move. "It was a ghost profile," he said quietly. "Not new. This isn't the first corridor defense logged under that ID." Ryan frowned. "Then it's some training plant. A test run from operations." Andrea walked over without a word and handed Wilson a folded printout. The page was thick, corners slightly creased, already marked up in pen. Wilson opened it carefully. At the top was a terrain arc, a devil's corridor rendering. Beneath it, a tactical chart annotated in tight handwriting. Entry speed, defensive position, extraction timing, exit strategy. He studied the curve, the exact match. Andrea's voice was low. "She wrote that 3 weeks ago." Wilson looked up at her. Andrea nodded once. "She held that position every morning before you all showed up." Ryan snatched the page. His eyes skimmed the notations, then narrowed. "Where's the signature?" "There isn't one," Andrea said. She never signed any of them. A second tech at the archive console leaned forward, tapping a key to expand the override log. One redacted entry blinked open with a soft tone. "Override access. Calloway." Everyone fell silent. Ryan stepped back, one hand curling into a fist near his leg. "That's not possible," he said. "She doesn't have combat clearance. She's not even on the deployment rotation." "She was," David said. 6 weeks ago. Listed as support, then removed." Wilson didn't look up from the engagement timing printout. "She held that corridor longer than any of us." Jason leaned over a second screen, watching the replay file run on loop. He said nothing, just let it play. The defensive bursts, the security perimeter, the enemy forces collapsing. Every time it cycled, the same outcome. No deviation. "She fought like she'd done it 100 times. Someone said from the side. Wilson answered without lifting his eyes. "Because she has." Sarah stepped in from the hallway, jacket half-zipped. Her expression had dropped from sharp to uncertain. She looked from the file to the screen, then to the line on the deployment board, where Ryan's name still held the top slot. Below it, a gap. No label. No entry. The tactical system had logged Megan's run as complete, but it had never assigned her a rank. "What are we supposed to do with that?" she asked. Ryan snapped the paper in his hand. "You can't let her get away with this. She hijacked a live mission. She operated without clearance." "She saved the mission," Andrea said. "That's not the point," Ryan snapped. "Isn't it?" David cut in. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise. The tactical feed was still open behind him. Ghost 4 to 100. 0%. Final result confirmed. David crossed his arms. "You retreated at 150 hostiles." She held against 400. Ryan's jaw tightened. "She wasn't even supposed to be deployed." "She didn't ask permission," Wilson replied. "She just fought." The weight of the words settled across the tent. On the back monitor, the Devil's Corridor arc replayed again. Megan's path traced its way across the terrain model in a perfect bow. The security held, the defensive bursts glowed, then the enemy dissolved. Every frame exact. Someone brought up the archive listing. The corridor data stretched back over 30 days. Dozens of runs, all logged under the same tag. No errors. No training flags. No debrief requests. "She solved it first," Andrea said. David nodded. "We just didn't see it." Wilson exhaled slowly and turned toward the terminal. He typed one line into the mission record. No announcement. No fanfare. Operator. Calloway. Status. Complete. Behind him, the operators moved in quiet agreement. One by one, they began adjusting the data logs. The names shifted. The stats reordered. Ryan's failure moved to line 2. Sarah's retreat to 3. Jason's overrun to 4. Ghost 4 became the new line 1. No one argued. The tent held a stillness that didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the moment just after truth arrives. Too late to prepare for. Too clean to deny. Ryan stared once more at the board, then turned and walked out without speaking. Sarah didn't follow. Jason sat back in his chair and let the footage play again. David walked to the far console, opened the tactical record, and saved a backup copy to his drive. No one spoke for a long time. Only the soft hum of the systems remained, and the faint click of Andrea resetting the terminal for the next rotation. Not that it would matter. There would be no better defense today. Megan had already finished the corridor and left them all watching. The tactical bay was dark, except for the blue glow of one terminal screen still blinking on standby. Most of the building had emptied out hours ago. The official debrief had ended just past 2,300. By then, the replays had been watched twice, the mission logs had been archived, and every soldier had walked out slower than they came in. But David had stayed. Something about the silence in the room pulled at him. He stepped inside quietly, not sure what he was looking for. The air was still faintly warm, the kind of heat left behind by long systems running at full load. Bay 6, the one furthest down the row, was cracked open an inch. The tactical console beside it showed no user ID, just an unfiled session logged as Ghost 4. He moved to the console. A memory stick sat in the slot, the red light on its side still blinking, still active, still warm. He didn't remove it. He touched the key once, and the tactical session loaded. The Devil's Corridor file appeared at full render. It opened instantly. No password, no encryption. He read the name in the header line. Not a code this time, not a number, just one word: Calloway. The data filled the screen. Full corridor defense trajectory, combat effectiveness log peaking at 400 hostiles, and holding steady for 97 seconds. Target neutralization held. Defensive timing exact. Completion rating 100. 0%. No assist, no automated correction, no fallback routine. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just stood there watching the numbers run again, watching the shape of the corridor play out in green lines across a black background, quiet as breath. Every second was intentional, every motion deliberate. It was her, beginning to end. Outside, a soft vibration passed through the floor. He turned. Through the side windows of the bay, past the line of empty gear carts and closed hangar doors, a Blackhawk moved across the far landing pad. No lights, no tower request, no beacon ID. It moved smooth and fast, its shape familiar even in silhouette. He stepped to the glass and watched. The engine flared once in the distance. Then the helicopter rose clean into the night, its nose cutting through the lower cloud cover without sound. It climbed at a soft angle, not showy, not urgent, but with certainty, the kind that didn't ask permission. On the observation deck above the tactical compound, Andrea stood with her jacket zipped to the chin, her hands in her pockets. She saw it too. No headset, no contact, just the single trail climbing through the dark. She didn't reach for the radio, she just watched. The terminal beside David gave a final beep. The session closed. The screen returned to standby. The memory stick light blinked once more, then went dark. He left it there. In the locker room, one cabinet remained open. Inside, a folded tactical vest sat clean on the shelf, gloves resting neatly above it. No name on the tag, no patch on the sleeve, just the faint indent of wear. The boots were gone. Someone had cleared out without making noise. There was no note, no trail, no message left on the board. Only the record and the silence that followed. On the ops deck, the team that had once joked about who could hold the corridor the longest now sat scattered, none of them speaking. The corridor had been held, not by any of them. Wilson had archived the result himself. Operator Calloway, mission complete. There would be meetings, protocols reviewed, questions raised about oversight, access, clearance, but none of that could undo what had already happened, because it had happened in front of all of them, and it had happened clean. By the time the control tower filed its midnight report, the unidentified flight had already cleared range. No flight path filed, no tracking beacon active, but the radar confirmed a single aircraft exiting a controlled climb, course unknown. The night air outside the bay was still cool, not quite cold. Above the tactical roofline, the vapor trail cut through the sky like a soft line drawn with certainty. She had left the record, not the explanation. Her name had never needed the board, and now, without a word, she was gone. But they would remember. 3 days later, the forward operating base buzzed with new tension. Reports had begun filtering in about Taliban movements through a network of caves southeast of their position. Colonel Herschel Hammond arrived at 0530, face drawn into tight lines, fresh from a secure video call with CENTCOM. Behind him, 4 high-ranking officers filed into the command center, bringing an air of controlled urgency. "Where's Captain Wilson?" Hammond asked, scanning the room. Andrea stepped forward. "In the field, sir. Convoy security detail. Get him back here. We've got a situation developing." The tactical displays along the wall shifted to a new terrain map, much larger than Devil's Corridor. The southeastern ridge system stretched in high-definition relief, with heat signatures pulsing in 3 distinct clusters. Intelligence operators moved with practiced efficiency, updating tactical overlays and enemy disposition markers. "Taliban forces are massing here, here, and here," Hammond said, pointing to the clusters. Intel suggests they're planning a coordinated attack on the provincial capital. We have a 12-hour window to disrupt their command structure before they mobilize. Ryan pushed through the gathering crowd, his tactical gear already secured. Sir, Echo Team is prepped and ready to deploy. Hammond gave him a cursory nod. You'll be part of the response force, but this isn't a standard combat mission. We need precision, not brute force. The main screen shifted to a close-up of a narrow valley nestled between two jagged ridge lines. At its center, a small cluster of buildings sat partially concealed by the terrain. This is their command post, Hammond continued. Designated high-value target zone. Intelligence confirms at least 20 senior Taliban commanders are gathering there to finalize attack plans. Sarah stepped closer to the display. What's the approach vector, sir? That's the problem, Hammond replied, his voice tightening. There isn't one. The room fell silent as the tactical system ran a simulation of potential approach paths. Every route flashed red. Too exposed, too steep, inadequate cover, excessive enemy presence. The computer's assessment appeared in bold text. Mission infeasible. The valley is a natural fortress, Hammond explained. Sheer cliffs on 3 sides, the only approach channel is heavily guarded. Drone strikes have been ruled out due to civilian presence. Air assault is impossible with the anti-aircraft emplacements they've established. So what's the plan, sir? Jason asked. Hammond's jaw tightened. We need someone to get in there, establish a defensive position, and hold off the enemy long enough for our main force to arrive and neutralize the command structure. Based on enemy numbers, whoever takes that position will face overwhelming odds. The room grew still. Hammond's eyes scanned the assembled operators. I need volunteers. No one spoke. The tactical display continued cycling through approach simulations, each one ending in failure. Ryan shifted his weight, but didn't step forward. Sarah and Jason exchanged glances but remained silent. Sir, Andrea said quietly. Permission to speak freely? Hammond nodded. This mission profile matches the parameters of Devil's Corridor, but with significantly higher difficulty. The only operator who successfully navigated a scenario of similar complexity was Sergeant Calloway. Hammond's eyebrows drew together. Calloway? She's intelligence support, not tactical. With respect, sir, David interjected, stepping forward with a tablet in hand. You need to see this. He handed Hammond the device. On screen, footage of Megan's Ghost 4 run played in silence. The colonel watched, his expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief, to grim understanding. Where is she now? He asked. Unknown, sir, Andrea replied. She departed base 3 days ago after the corridor exercise. No assigned deployment. Hammond handed the tablet back to David. Find her. Now, the base erupted into controlled chaos. Communication specialists attempted to trace Megan's last known location. Helicopter crews prepared for immediate deployment. Intelligence officers scoured recent field reports for any mention of her name. In the tactical bay, David worked feverishly at the console, analyzing Megan's previous simulation patterns. Andrea stood behind him, watching the data scroll across the screen. Her Ghost 4 profile shows consistent movement toward high-difficulty engagements, David said. She wasn't just training for Devil's Corridor. She was preparing for something bigger. Andrea leaned closer. You think she knew this was coming? I think she's always known more than she let on. The door slammed open. Wilson strode in, dusty from the field, his expression hard. What's this about Sergeant Calloway being our only option? David turned. Sir, she's the only one who's proven capable of holding a defensive position against these kinds of odds. She's not authorized for direct combat. With respect, Captain, Andrea said. Authorization seems to be the least of our problems right now. Wilson's radio crackled. Hammond's voice cut through the static. Wilson, Command Center, now. In the Command Center, the situation had deteriorated. Updated intelligence showed Taliban forces beginning to move. The 12-hour window was shrinking. Still no sign of Calloway? Hammond asked as Wilson entered. No, sir. No communication, no sightings, no trace. Hammond cursed under his breath. "We don't have time to wait. We need to deploy the best available team and hope they can." The radio interrupted him. "Command, this is Outpost Bravo. We've got movement in Sector 7. "Taliban?" Hammond asked. "Negative, sir. Single operator on foot. Moving fast through the southern pass. Heading directly toward the target zone." "Identification?" "None, sir. No transponder, no call sign." David stepped forward, a new tactical feed appearing on his tablet. "Sir, I'm picking up a ghost signal. Same signature as the corridor exercise." Hammond's eyes narrowed. "Put it on the main screen." The display shifted. A single heat signature moved through the rugged terrain, taking a path no one had considered. Not because it was overlooked, but because it was deemed impossible. The figure navigated along a nearly vertical cliff face, staying in blind spots that avoided enemy patrols with surgical precision. "That's not possible," Ryan muttered. "No one could move through that terrain undetected." But the signature continued advancing, steady and deliberate, flowing through the landscape like water finding the path of least resistance. "Is it her?" Hammond demanded. Andrea studied the movement pattern. "The approach methodology matches her simulation profile. It's her signature." "She's heading straight for the target zone," Wilson said. "But she's alone." Hammond activated the tactical comms. "All units, we have a friendly operator entering the target zone. Prepare for immediate deployment to provide support. Air assets on standby." The room watched in tense silence as Megan's signature reached the edge of the valley. She paused briefly, then descended into the target area, using a route that didn't appear on any of their maps. A narrow crevice that provided perfect concealment. "How did she even know that was there?" Jason asked. "Because she studies terrain like no one else," Andrea answered quietly. "She doesn't just read maps. She understands them." Megan's signature entered the command post perimeter without triggering any alarms. She moved through the compound with deliberate stealth, taking position in what tactical analysis identified as the optimal defensive location, a partially collapsed building with clear sightlines to all approach vectors. "What's she doing?" Ryan asked. "She can't possibly hold that position alone." As if in answer, the first explosion rocked the valley. On the thermal imaging, several Taliban ammunition caches suddenly flared bright white, then disappeared. Secondary explosions followed in a carefully orchestrated chain reaction. "She's creating chaos," Wilson said, understanding dawning, drawing their attention to multiple points simultaneously. "Sir!" a communications officer called out. "We're picking up a transmission," the speakers crackled, and Megan's voice, calm and measured, filled the command center. "Ghost 4 to command. I have eyes on 23 HVTs. Defensive position established. Enemy force approximately 400 strong and responding to diversionary explosions. Request immediate air support and ground reinforcement. I can hold this position for 1 hour." Hammond grabbed the radio. "Ghost 4, this is Colonel Hammond. Confirm your situation." "Situation is green, sir. I have acquired an M249 from a fallen Navy SEAL reconnaissance team. Ammunition sufficient for sustained defense. All approaches covered." "A SEAL team?" Hammond's eyes widened. "We had no authorization for—" "They were here gathering intelligence, sir," Megan interrupted. "Ambushed. 2 days ago. I found the survivor, but he didn't make it. His last order was to complete the mission." The implication hung in the air. A covert operation no one knew about. A final duty passed to the only person who could fulfill it. "Copy that, Ghost 4, Hammond said after a moment. "Support inbound. ETA 40 minutes. "Understood, sir." Ghost 4 out. As the communication ended, the tactical display erupted with activity. Taliban forces converged on Megan's position from all directions. Her defensive fire appeared as short, disciplined bursts. Nothing wasted, each sequence precisely calculated to funnel the attackers into kill zones. "How is she doing that?" Sarah whispered. "The same way she held the corridor," Andrea answered. "Perfect positioning, perfect timing, perfect discipline." Hammond turned to Wilson. "Get every available asset moving. Now, The base exploded into action. Helicopter crews ran to their birds. Combat teams loaded into vehicles. Air support was scrambled from neighboring bases. Everyone moved with desperate urgency, knowing they were racing against impossible odds. Inside the tactical center, operators watched as Megan's lone position held against wave after wave of Taliban fighters. Her ammunition expenditure rate remained steady, never panicking, never firing more than necessary to repel each assault. The enemy body count climbed steadily, creating natural barriers that further channeled attacking forces into her prepared firing lanes. 20 minutes since engagement, David reported. Enemy casualties approximately 70. Her position remains secure. She can't keep this up, Ryan said, shaking his head. But she did. As the minutes ticked by, Megan's defense never faltered. When one approach was compromised, she shifted slightly, adapting her tactics to the changing battlefield. When ammunition ran low for one firing angle, she compensated with precisely placed explosives fashioned from enemy ordnance. 30 minutes, Andrea announced. Support is still 10 minutes out. On the tactical display, the enemy launched a coordinated attack from all sides simultaneously. Hundreds of fighters swarmed toward Megan's position. She can't hold against that, Jason said. Everyone in the room held their breath as the wave crashed against Megan's defenses. For a moment, her signature was completely surrounded, engulfed by the sheer volume of attackers. Then, incredibly, the swarm began to thin. Precise bursts of fire cut through the mass. Carefully placed explosives detonated in sequence. The M249's distinctive firing pattern never wavered, never grew frantic. "Unbelievable," Hammond breathed. "Sir," David said, pointing to the display, "the HVTs are moving. They're trying to escape." Indeed, the high-value targets were using the massive assault as cover to slip away through a hidden tunnel system. But Megan had anticipated this. As the commanders emerged from a concealed exit half a kilometer away, they ran directly into a field of improvised explosive devices she had placed during her approach. The tactical display flashed with multiple eliminations. 15 of the 23 commanders neutralized in an instant. "Our birds are 2 minutes out," Wilson reported. On screen, Megan's position was nearly overrun. The remaining Taliban fighters, enraged by the loss of their leadership, focused all their fury on her location. The M249 continued firing, but her movement had become restricted as enemies closed in from all sides. "She's not going to make it," Sarah said, her voice tight. The first helicopter appeared at the edge of the tactical display, miniguns blazing as it swept over the valley. 2 more followed, then 4. Ground forces poured in from the northern approach, cutting through the remaining resistance. But all eyes remained fixed on Megan's position, now obscured by smoke and debris. Her signal flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Still there. Still fighting. As friendly forces secured the perimeter and pushed toward the center, the radio crackled again. Ghost 4 to command. Mission complete. HVTs neutralized. Request immediate medical evacuation for multiple wounded. Hammond grabbed the radio. Ghost 4, confirm your status. A long pause. Then, softer than before. Still here, sir. Just need a minute. In the valley, soldiers reported the scene with awe in their voices. 400 Taliban fighters lay scattered across the approaches. Empty ammunition casings formed a perfect circle around a partially collapsed building. And in the center, Sergeant Megan Calloway sat with her back against a concrete slab, the M249 across her lap, breathing slowly but steadily. When the medical team reached her, they found 3 gunshot wounds, shoulder, leg, and side. None fatal, but each one would have sent most soldiers into shock. She had bandaged them herself while continuing to fight. As they loaded her onto a stretcher, one of the medics asked how she had held out so long against so many. Megan looked at him with steady eyes and simply said, "Someone had to." Back at the command center, the full assessment began to come in. Over 400 enemy fighters engaged. 23 high-value targets eliminated. The entire Taliban offensive neutralized before it could begin. Estimated civilian casualties that would have resulted from their attack. Thousands. All prevented by one soldier who was never supposed to be there. Hammond stood at the tactical display, studying the final battle map with its concentric rings of neutralized enemy forces. "I want her decorated for this," he said quietly. "Highest honors." Andrea and David exchanged glances. "Sir," Andrea said carefully, "you should know. She's never accepted recognition before." Hammond turned. "What do you mean?" "This isn't the first time she's done something like this. Just the first time we were watching." The military hospital at Bagram Air Base hummed with its usual efficiency, but the atmosphere in the recovery wing had shifted subtly since the arrival of their newest patient. Medical staff moved with quiet reverence outside room 217, speaking in hushed tones as they checked charts and adjusted IV drips. Inside, Sergeant Megan Calloway lay still against white sheets, her eyes closed, monitors tracking her steady vitals. 3 separate wound dressings marked her body: shoulder, side, thigh, each one a testament to what should have been impossible. "She still hasn't woken up?" Colonel Hammond asked, standing in the doorway, his uniform pressed despite the early hour. Dr. Winters, a veteran combat surgeon with salt and pepper hair, shook his head. "She's not unconscious, Colonel. She's sleeping. There's a difference. Her body is recovering exactly as it should from injuries that would have killed most soldiers. She'll wake when she's ready." Hammond studied the still figure. In repose, Megan looked smaller somehow, the fierce competence that had held off 400 Taliban fighters temporarily masked by closed eyes and steady breathing. The contradiction fascinated him, how someone so overlooked could become so pivotal in a moment of crisis. "I need her statement," Hammond said. "Washington is asking questions." "Washington can wait," Dr. Winters replied, unmoved by rank in matters concerning his patients. "Her body can't. She lost nearly 40% of her blood volume. Operated a 22-pound machine gun with a shattered collarbone. Kept fighting with a bullet lodged 3 centimeters from her femoral artery. She's earned a few hours of sleep." Hammond didn't argue. The doctor was right, of course. Instead, he pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. "I'll wait." The doctor raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he left the room. Outside in the hallway, a small crowd had gathered. Ryan, Sarah, and Jason stood awkwardly near the nurse's station, trying to appear casual despite their obvious interest. They had arrived separately, but with the same unspoken purpose. They needed to see her, the ghost who had become suddenly, undeniably real. Andrea and David sat on a bench across from the recovery room, sharing a tablet that displayed the after-action reports. The numbers were still hard to believe, even for those who had witnessed the event through tactical feeds. 1 operator. 400 enemies. A 97-minute defensive hold when the most optimistic assessment had been 20 minutes. "Have they identified the SEAL team?" Andrea asked quietly. David shook his head. "Classified beyond our clearance. The official report just lists, quote, reconnaissance element with no further details." "And the M249? Standard issue, but modified. Custom grip, adjusted feed tray, reinforced bipod." Someone knew exactly what they were doing with that weapon. Andrea wasn't surprised. If there was one thing she had learned about Megan Calloway, it was that she left nothing to chance. Every detail was considered. Every variable calculated. Even in the chaos of combat, she maintained a precision that bordered on prescience. Inside the room, Megan's eyes opened. She didn't jolt awake or gasp dramatically. She simply transitioned from sleep to consciousness with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything she did. Her gaze found Hammond immediately, assessing him with calm clarity, despite the drugs coursing through her system. "Colonel," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Sergeant Calloway," Hammond replied. "How are you feeling?" "Operational, sir." Hammond couldn't help but smile. 3 gunshot wounds, and she described herself as operational. The word choice was pure Calloway. "The mission?" she asked. "Complete success. All 23 high-value targets neutralized. Taliban offensive completely disrupted. The provincial capital is secure." Megan nodded once, satisfaction briefly visible in her eyes before her expression returned to its usual composed state. "I need to ask you some questions, Sergeant." "Yes, sir. How did you know about the Taliban gathering?" "That wasn't in any briefing." Megan's gaze was direct. "I listen, sir. When others talk, when the land speaks, when patterns emerge. 3 weeks ago, local shepherds changed their grazing routes. 2 weeks ago, supply trucks began taking detours. 1 week ago, radio chatter shifted frequencies. Small things, but connected." "You developed this intelligence on your own?" "I confirmed it, sir." "The SEAL team had the initial lead." Hammond leaned forward. "About that team, there's no record of any special forces operations in that sector." "With respect, Colonel, there wouldn't be." "And yet, you found them." "One of them, sir. Chief Petty Officer Michael Rawlins. He was severely wounded when I reached him. He'd been monitoring the compound for 3 days. His team had been compromised during insertion." "He gave you the M249? Megan's eyes shifted to the middle distance, remembering. "His last order was to complete the mission. He said the weapon was wasted on a dead man. Then he gave me his cross-comm intelligence feed and told me to make it count. He died 90 seconds later." Hammond was quiet for a moment, processing. Finally, he asked the question that had been circling since the moment they'd identified her signal entering the valley. "Why did you go alone, Sergeant? Why not report the intelligence, request a proper strike force?" Megan's answer came without hesitation. "There wasn't time, sir. The window was closing. By the time I could convince someone with authority, brief a team, deploy assets, and execute, the target would have been gone. Sometimes the only option is the direct one." "That was a suicide mission." "No, sir. It was a calculated risk. I knew the terrain. I'd studied the approach vectors. I understood the enemy patterns. I had Chief Rawlins' intelligence. The probability of success was higher than it appeared. You held off 400 Taliban fighters by yourself." For the first time, something like emotion flickered across Megan's face. Not pride, but a sort of quiet certainty. "Someone had to, sir." Those 3 words, the same one she'd spoken to the medic in the field, contained volumes. Not bravado, not heroism in the conventional sense, but a simple recognition of necessity. Someone had to, so she did. Hammond sat back in his chair, studying her. "Washington wants to give you a medal." Megan's expression didn't change. "That's not necessary, sir. It's not about necessity, Sergeant. It's about recognition. With respect, Colonel, I don't do what I do for recognition." Before Hammond could respond, the door opened. A nurse entered, followed by Dr. Winters, who frowned at seeing his patient awake and engaged in conversation. "That's enough, Colonel," the doctor said firmly. "She needs rest." Hammond stood. "We'll continue this discussion later, Sergeant." Megan nodded once. "Sir." As Hammond left the room, he found the hallway more crowded than before. Word had spread. Soldiers from various units had gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and something deeper. Respect, perhaps, or a kind of wondering disbelief. They parted to let him pass, their questions unspoken but palpable. He stopped at the nurse's station, where Andrea and David still sat with their tablet. "Lieutenant Pierce," he said to Andrea, "a word." They stepped aside, finding a quiet corner amid the bustle of the medical wing. "You said this isn't the first time," Hammond began without preamble. "What did you mean?" Andrea hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sergeant Calloway has a pattern of being in the right place at exactly the right time, sir. The Devil's Corridor exercise was just the most visible instance." "Explain." 6 months ago, a supply convoy was ambushed in Sector 12. Official reports indicate they were saved by, quote, "unexpected support fire from an adjacent ridge." No units claimed responsibility. "And you believe that was Calloway?" 3 weeks before that incident, she ran 17 consecutive supply route simulations through that exact sector. I checked the logs myself after the corridor exercise. Hammond's expression darkened. "What else?" 4 months ago, a Taliban bomb maker was found neutralized in his workshop. Special forces had been tracking him for weeks but couldn't get close. The day before, Sergeant Calloway requisitioned detailed maps of that district, citing, quote, intelligence analysis. You're telling me she's been conducting unauthorized operations for months? I'm saying she sees things others miss, sir. And sometimes she acts on that information when conventional channels would be too slow. Hammond ran a hand across his face, the implications settling like a weight. Why wasn't this brought to my attention sooner? There was never definitive proof, sir. Just patterns. And results. The colonel was silent for a long moment. Who else knows about this? David suspected. A few others might have noticed inconsistencies but didn't connect the dots. Megan is careful. Not careful enough to avoid 3 gunshot wounds. Andrea's voice grew quieter. Sir, with respect, she held a position against 400 enemy fighters for 97 minutes with those wounds. I'd say that's the definition of careful. Hammond couldn't argue with that logic. He dismissed Andrea with a nod and made his way toward the exit, his mind working through the implications of what he'd learned. A soldier operating outside the chain of command was a serious breach of protocol. But a soldier who consistently achieved impossible results, who saved lives when no one else could, who asked for nothing in return, that was something else entirely. Something worth protecting, perhaps. Back in room 217, Megan lay awake despite the doctor's orders to rest. Her mind was already mapping recovery timelines, calculating physical therapy progressions, planning the next mission. Because there would be a next mission. There always was, whether officially sanctioned or not. Her fingers traced the edge of her bandaged shoulder, feeling the outline of the wound beneath. Chief Rawlins' face flashed in her memory, the fierce determination in his eyes as he pressed the M249 into her hands, the quiet acceptance as he recognized his own end approaching, the final nod as she promised to complete what his team had started. Make it count, he had said, and she had. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened to reveal Sarah Mitchell, still in tactical gear, dust from the field clinging to her boots. "Hey," Sarah said, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Can I come in?" Megan nodded once. Sarah entered but remained standing, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did out there." "No need," Megan replied simply. "There is, though." Sarah moved closer to the bed. "You saved a lot of lives, including ours. We were being deployed as the secondary force. If you hadn't held that position..." She left the thought unfinished, the implication clear. Megan said nothing, but her gaze remained steady on Sarah's face. "I also wanted to apologize," Sarah continued, "for not seeing what you could do, for dismissing you as just support staff." "It doesn't matter." "It does, though." Sarah's voice grew firmer. "We were so busy competing with each other, trying to prove who was the best, that we missed what was right in front of us. You weren't just better, you were in a completely different category." For the first time, something like discomfort crossed Megan's face. Recognition was foreign territory for her, harder to navigate than enemy-held valleys or midnight infiltrations. "How did you do it?" Sarah asked, genuine curiosity replacing her earlier awkwardness. "How did you hold position for so long against so many?" Megan was quiet for a moment, considering. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "It's not about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about understanding the battlefield completely. Every angle, every shadow, every sound. You make the terrain work for you. You find the patterns in chaos. You calculate rather than react. But the fear is just another variable to manage." Megan's eyes met Sarah's directly. "Fear doesn't have to control you. Neither does doubt. They're just data points." Sarah absorbed this, nodding slowly. "They're talking about you everywhere on base, you know. The ghost who saved an entire province. The mission saved the province. I was just the instrument." Sarah smiled slightly. "And modest, too. No wonder we all missed it." A nurse appeared in the doorway, signaling that visiting time was over. Sarah stepped back, hesitated, then reached out and briefly touched Megan's uninjured arm. "Thank you," she said again, and this time Megan didn't deflect it. After Sarah left, more visitors came. Ryan, more subdued than usual. Jason, awkwardly respectful. David, who said little but whose eyes conveyed understanding. Andrea brought fresh maps and intelligence reports, correctly guessing that recovery would be more tolerable for Megan if her mind remained engaged. Each interaction carried the weight of shifted perception, of barriers falling, of respect newly earned, or, perhaps more accurately, finally acknowledged. Throughout it all, Megan remained herself, quiet, observant, efficient in word and emotion. She accepted their presence without demanding it, their recognition without requiring it. She had never fought for their approval, only for the mission's success. The fact that one had led to the other was incidental. 3 days later, against medical advice, but with grudging acceptance from Dr. Winters, Megan was sitting upright in bed reviewing tactical assessments when General Richard Markham entered her room. The 4 stars on his shoulders carried the weight of CENTCOM's authority. Behind him, Colonel Hammond stood at parade rest, his expression carefully neutral. "Sergeant Calloway," the general began without preamble, "I've reviewed the reports of your actions 3 days ago. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it." "Thank you, sir," Megan responded, her voice giving away nothing. "I've also reviewed your service record. Harvard graduate. Top of your class in intelligence training. Multiple languages. Expert marksmanship scores that you seem to have kept deliberately mediocre on official tests." The general raised an eyebrow. "You've been hiding your light under a rather large bushel, Sergeant." Megan didn't confirm or deny, simply waited for him to continue. "Colonel Hammond has informed me of your extracurricular activities, the unauthorized operations, the solo missions. The pattern of being precisely where you're needed most, often without orders or official sanction." Here it comes, Hammond thought. The reprimand. The disciplinary action. The end of an extraordinary career before it had properly begun. But General Markham surprised him. "In 30 years of military service," the general continued, "I've learned to recognize exceptional talent when I see it. I've also learned that conventional structures sometimes fail to properly utilize that talent." He placed a folder on Megan's bed. "This is a transfer order. Special Operations Command has expressed interest in your particular skill set. A team is being formed. Unconventional operators for unconventional threats. The parameters would allow for significant autonomy within strategic objectives." Megan opened the folder, her eyes scanning the document with practiced efficiency. "This isn't a punishment, Sergeant," Markham added. "It's recognition that some soldiers don't fit neatly within traditional command structures. Some operate best when given objectives, rather than step-by-step instructions." Megan looked up from the folder. "And if I decline, sir? Then you'll face disciplinary action for the unauthorized operations, be reduced in rank, and likely spend the remainder of your enlistment behind a desk." The general's expression softened slightly. "But that would be a waste of extraordinary talent, and we both know it." Hammond watched as Megan considered the options, her face revealing nothing of her internal calculations. He had come to recognize this expression, not blank but intensely focused, running scenarios and probabilities faster than most people could articulate them. "When would this transfer take effect?" she asked finally. "As soon as you're medically cleared. The team is being assembled now. You'd be among the first operatives. And my operational parameters would be significantly broader than your current role. The details are classified, but I can tell you that your tendency to see patterns others miss would be considered an asset rather than an inconvenience." Megan closed the folder. "I'll need time to consider, sir." The general nodded once. "You have 48 hours, Sergeant." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I believe this is where you belong. Some soldiers are meant to follow a clear path. Others are meant to forge new ones." After he departed, Hammond remained, studying Megan with newfound perspective. "You knew this was coming," he said. "Not a question, but an observation." "I calculated the possibility," she admitted. "Actions have consequences, even necessary ones. Is that why you never sought recognition? Why you operated in the shadows? You knew it would eventually force a reckoning." Megan's gaze was steady. "I did what needed to be done, when it needed to be done. The structures and protocols exist for good reasons, but sometimes they're too slow. Sometimes the right action doesn't fit within established parameters. And now? Now I have a choice to make." Hammond moved closer to the bed. "It's not really a choice, though, is it?" This transfer is everything you've been working toward, whether you knew it or not. The freedom to operate as you see fit. The authorization to trust your instincts. Perhaps, Megan said. But there are other considerations. Such as? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, "Did you ever wonder why I chose Devil's Corridor for my simulation runs, Colonel? Why that particular tactical problem?" Hammond hadn't, but now that she mentioned it, the question seemed obvious. Why did you? Because it was deemed impossible by conventional metrics. Because everyone who attempted it failed. Because solving it required thinking beyond established tactical doctrine. Her voice remained calm, but there was an intensity beneath it that Hammond hadn't heard before. "I don't seek out challenges to prove myself, Colonel. I seek them out because someone needs to solve them. And this new assignment would give you more such challenges." "Yes, a simple acknowledgement of fact." "Then what's holding you back?" Megan was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less resolved. "Nothing. I just needed to be certain of my own motivations." Hammond nodded, understanding dawning. Megan Calloway didn't make decisions based on career advancement or recognition. She made them based on where she could be most effective, where she could save the most lives, where her unique abilities would matter most. "They'll be lucky to have you," he said. "Perhaps we'll be lucky to have each other," she replied. "A team is only as strong as its weakest link. I'll need to assess their capabilities before committing." Hammond couldn't help but smile at that. Even facing a career-defining opportunity, she remained thoroughly herself. Analytical, measured, focused on effectiveness rather than ego. "I'll leave you to rest," he said, moving toward the door. "Colonel," Megan called softly. When he turned, she added, "Thank you for understanding." It was perhaps the most personal thing she had ever said to him. Hammond nodded once, accepting the rare acknowledgement for what it was. Not gratitude for favor or special treatment, but appreciation for seeing her clearly, for recognizing the purpose behind her actions. As he left the room, Hammond found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them here. From an overlooked intelligence analyst to the soldier who single-handedly changed the course of a battle. From operating in shadows to standing in the spotlight, however reluctantly. From being doubted to being legendary. And through it all, Megan Calloway had remained unchanged. Not seeking validation, not craving recognition, simply doing what needed to be done because someone had to. That, Hammond realized, was the true measure of her character. Not the 400 Taliban fighters she had held off, not the impossible odds she had overcome, but the quiet certainty with which she had faced each challenge, asking nothing in return except the opportunity to make a difference. That was a kind of courage far rarer than battlefield heroics, and far more valuable. The briefing room at Fort Bragg hummed with subdued energy, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled similar spaces in Afghanistan. Here, beneath the Carolina pines, with American soil firm underfoot, the urgency was different, calculated rather than desperate. 2 years had passed since the Valley confrontation that had altered the trajectory of Megan Calloway's military career. 2 years of carefully selected missions, specialized training, and operations that existed in the shadowed spaces between official and unofficial. Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Hargrove stood at the head of the table, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform immaculate despite the early hour. Around her sat the elite team known officially as Tactical Special Operations Unit 7, and unofficially as the Ghosts. 7 operators, each selected for exceptional abilities that defied conventional metrics. "Tehran's situation is critical," Hargrove said without preamble. "Intelligence confirms Iranian nuclear physicist Dr. Nazari is being held against his will by Revolutionary Guard elements. He possesses information that could accelerate weapons development by 5 years. Extraction window closes in 72 hours when he's scheduled for transfer to a hardened facility near Qom." Satellite imagery appeared on the wall screen, a compound on the outskirts of Tehran, surrounded by concentric rings of security. Guard rotations, approach vectors, and terrain features were highlighted in crisp detail. "Conventional infiltration has been deemed impossible," Hargrove continued. "The State Department is pursuing diplomatic channels, but progress is minimal. CIA assets in the region have been compromised. This has been classified as a no-win scenario. At the far end of the table, Megan Calloway sat with perfect stillness, her eyes cataloging every detail of the display. She wore no rank insignia on her specialized tactical uniform. None of them did. The Ghosts operated beyond traditional hierarchy, each mission assigning leadership based on specific expertise rather than seniority. "Thoughts?" Hargrove asked, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on Megan. Captain Marcus Reynolds, former Delta operator with a reputation for aggressive tactical solutions, spoke first. "Halo insertion. Fast rope to the northwest corner. Breach through the service entrance. Extract the package before they know we're there." Lieutenant Sarah Collins, intelligence specialist with CIA cross-training, shook her head. "Aerial approach is monitored by Russian-supplied radar systems. They detect the insertion and move the package before touchdown." "Tunnel," suggested Major James Wilson, demolitions expert with 3 tours in Iraq. "Bedrock is too dense," countered Lieutenant Michael Chen, the team's engineering specialist. "Would take weeks, not days." As the discussion continued, Megan remained silent, her focus unwavering on the tactical display. She wasn't ignoring her teammates. She was absorbing their perspectives, incorporating their insights into the evolving solution taking shape in her mind. Hargrove noticed the silence. "Calloway? Your assessment?" All eyes turned to Megan. In the 2 years since her transfer to Special Operations, her reputation had only grown. The quiet intelligence analyst who had held off 400 Taliban fighters was now something more. A tactical savant whose unorthodox approaches had succeeded where traditional methods failed. Her teammates had learned to listen when she spoke, even if her solutions sometimes seemed impossible at first glance. "We're approaching this wrong," Megan said, her voice soft but clear. "We're trying to solve the wrong problem." She stood and moved to the tactical display, her movements precise, despite the lingering stiffness in her shoulder, a permanent reminder of the Valley battle. "The compound isn't the target," she continued. "Dr. Nazari is. And Dr. Nazari isn't just a package to be extracted. He's a person with specific psychological characteristics." Her fingers traced a pattern across the display, highlighting personnel files rather than terrain features. "Dr. Nazari is a devoted family man. His wife and 2 children were placed under house arrest when he was taken. His primary motivation will be their safety, not his own." She switched to another screen, bringing up surveillance photos of a modest Tehran apartment building. Revolutionary Guard Commander Farsi oversees both Dr. Nazari's detention and his family's house arrest. Farsi has a routine. Every Tuesday he personally inspects the detention facility, then visits Nazari's family to remind them of the consequences should the doctor not cooperate. Megan pulled up a street map of Tehran. The route between these locations creates a 12-minute window where traditional security protocols are weakened at both sites. Neither fully secured, neither fully vulnerable, but both in transition. The room had gone silent, all eyes following Megan's methodical breakdown. "We don't extract Dr. Nazari from the compound," she concluded. "We create a situation where he and his family are moved simultaneously, then intercept during transit. The weak point isn't in the static defenses, it's in the dynamic security adjustments." Hargrove studied the approach, her expression thoughtful. "That's still a narrow window with multiple variables." "It is," Megan acknowledged. "But it's not impossible." The word hung in the air, impossible. For Megan Calloway, it had long since lost its power as a deterrent. Instead, it had become a starting point, a challenge to be deconstructed and overcome. "Walk us through it," Hargrove ordered. For the next hour, Megan outlined a plan of such precision and unconventional thinking that it gradually silenced all objections. Not through force of personality or rank, but through the inexorable logic of someone who had considered every angle, every contingency, every potential point of failure. By the time she finished, the room had transformed. What had begun as skepticism had evolved into tentative belief, then resolute determination. The impossible had become possible. Difficult, dangerous, but achievable. "We deploy in 6 hours, Hargrove announced. "Get your gear and get your rest. Calloway has operational lead on this one." As the team dispersed to prepare, Sarah Collins fell into step beside Megan in the hallway. "Another impossible mission?" she asked, a hint of admiration in her voice. "No such thing," Megan replied. "Just problems we haven't solved yet." Sarah studied her colleague's profile. "You know, when you first joined the team, some of us wondered if the stories were exaggerated. 400 Taliban, a Navy SEAL's M249, holding the line alone for over 90 minutes." She shook her head. Seemed like the kind of legend that grows with each telling. "Most legends do," Megan acknowledged. "But not yours," Sarah persisted. "If anything, the reports understated what happened that day. I've seen the classified after-action assessment. You didn't just hold them off. You systematically dismantled their entire command structure, with 3 gunshot wounds." Megan stopped walking, turning to face Sarah directly. "Why are you bringing this up now?" Sarah hesitated, then pressed on. "Because I need to understand, not just what you did, but why. What makes someone run toward impossible odds instead of away from them? What makes you different?" For a long moment, Megan was silent, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her words were measured, carefully chosen. "I'm not different. Not in any way that matters. I just see patterns others miss, and I act on what I see." "That's it? Just pattern recognition and preparation," Megan added. "I never face a situation I haven't already visualized from every angle. When the moment comes, it's not the first time I'm solving that problem. It's just the first time I'm doing it outside my own mind." Sarah absorbed this, nodding slowly. "And the courage? The willingness to stand alone when everything says you should run?" Something shifted in Megan's eyes. Not vulnerability exactly, but a momentary glimpse behind her usual composed exterior. "It's not about courage," she said quietly. "It's about necessity. Someone has to stand in the gap. Someone has to hold the line. Sometimes that someone is me." Before Sarah could respond, Megan continued down the hallway, the conversation clearly finished. It wasn't rudeness, it was simply Megan's way. She spoke when necessary, fell silent when not, and never wasted energy on words that didn't serve a purpose. 6 hours later, a C-17 Globemaster III thundered through the night sky over the Atlantic, its cargo hold dimly lit and filled with the quiet efficiency of elite operators preparing for insertion. The Ghosts moved through their pre-mission rituals with practiced precision, checking equipment, reviewing intelligence, focusing minds on the task ahead. Megan sat slightly apart, her eyes closed, not in sleep, but in intense concentration. In her mind, she was already in Tehran, moving through the streets, anticipating every contingency, mapping every potential variable. By the time her boots touched Iranian soil, she would have mentally executed the mission dozens of times, refining and adjusting with each iteration. Across the hold, Marcus Reynolds watched her with a mixture of respect and lingering skepticism. Unlike others, he had not immediately embraced Megan's tactical genius. His journey from doubter to believer had been gradual, marked by mission after successful mission, where her unorthodox approaches had proven decisive. "Still don't know how she does it," he muttered to Wilson, who was checking his demolition charges. Wilson glanced up. "Does what?" "Sees the angles no one else does. Finds the solution that shouldn't exist." Marcus shook his head. "It's like she's playing chess while the rest of us are playing checkers." "It's not magic," Wilson replied. "It's just a different kind of intelligence. Most of us are trained to follow established tactical doctrine. Calloway doesn't ignore the doctrine. She just doesn't let it limit her thinking. You think they knew what they had when they assigned her to intelligence analysis? Seems like a waste in retrospect." Wilson carefully secured a charge before answering. "I think the system doesn't always know what to do with people who don't fit neatly into predefined roles. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones that don't quite belong anywhere, until they find exactly where they're needed most." The conversation died as Hargrove moved through the hold, checking final preparations. She paused briefly beside Megan, who opened her eyes at her approach. "Team's ready," Hargrove said. "Any last-minute adjustments to the plan?" "No," Megan replied. "The approach is solid. The variables are accounted for." Hargrove nodded once. This is why I wanted you for this team, Calloway. Not just because you can hold off 400 Taliban fighters, but because you see solutions where others see impossibilities. The solutions are always there, Megan said. They're just not always obvious. 48 hours later, the mission was complete. Dr. Nazari and his family had been successfully extracted during the precise 12-minute window Megan had identified, spirited away through Tehran's labyrinthine streets using a series of carefully orchestrated diversions and false signals. By the time Iranian authorities realized what had happened, the ghosts and their charges were already across the border, en route to a secure extraction point. The operation would later be classified as one of the most elegant extractions in special operations history, not because of overwhelming force or technological superiority, but because of its precision, its timing, and its complete understanding of human and tactical variables. Back at Fort Bragg, the debriefing was brief and understated. Success was acknowledged, lessons noted, improvements suggested. There were no grand celebrations, no chest-thumping victories. For the ghosts, excellence was expected, not exceptional. As the team dispersed, Hargrove called Megan back. "The Pentagon has taken notice," she said once they were alone. "Your operational approach is being studied by tactical analysts. They're calling it Calloway methodology, a systematic approach to seemingly impossible scenarios." Megan's expression didn't change. The approach isn't new. It's just applied differently. Nevertheless, they want to formalize it. Create a training program. You'd be the primary instructor. Now Megan's eyebrow raised slightly, the closest she came to showing surprise. "I'm not a teacher. You wouldn't be teaching in the traditional sense. You'd be showing others how to see what you see, how to think beyond conventional parameters." Hargrove leaned against the desk. "Think about it, Calloway. How many lives could be saved if your approach became standard doctrine? How many, quote, impossible missions could become possible?" Megan was silent, considering. The idea of stepping into a formal instructional role was foreign to her. She had never sought to lead or teach. She had simply solved the problems in front of her because they needed solving. "I'll need time to consider," she said finally. "Take it," Hargrove replied. "But not too much. The world doesn't slow down for deliberation." 3 days later, Megan found herself walking the training grounds at dawn, the Carolina mist clinging to the ground in ethereal wisps. She had always done her best thinking in motion. Her mind somehow clearer when her body was engaged. The question of the training program weighed on her, not because she doubted her ability to formalize her methodology, but because she questioned whether her approach could truly be taught. Was her way of seeing patterns something that could be transferred to others? Or was it intrinsic, a product of her unique cognitive architecture? As she rounded a bend in the trail, she came upon an unexpected sight, a group of new recruits struggling through a tactical problem on one of the training fields. Their frustration was evident in their body language, their movements increasingly desperate as they failed again and again to achieve their objective. Megan stopped, observing. The scenario was familiar, a modified version of the Devil's Corridor she had mastered years ago. The young operators were approaching it conventionally, following established doctrine that simply couldn't solve the particular challenge they faced. Without conscious decision, she found herself moving toward them. The instructor, recognizing her immediately, straightened to attention. "Sergeant Calloway," he acknowledged, using her formal rank despite her current special operations status. "Observing the new intake?" "They're approaching it wrong," she said simply. The instructor nodded. "They've been at it for 3 hours. Standard approaches aren't working." Megan studied the team for a moment longer, then asked, "May I?" The instructor stepped aside, curious. "Be my guest." She moved to where the recruits had gathered, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and determination. They recognized her immediately. Her reputation had long since permeated every level of special operations. "You're trying to solve the problem as presented," she began without introduction. "That's your first mistake." A young lieutenant, bolder than his peers, spoke up. "With respect, ma'am, we're following tactical doctrine." "Doctrine is a framework, not a limitation," Megan replied. "The solution isn't in the manual because this scenario was specifically designed to defeat manual approaches." She moved to the tactical board, erasing their planned approach with a single sweep. Stop seeing the corridor as an obstacle to be overcome. See it as a tool to be used. For the next 30 minutes, Megan broke down the problem step by step, showing them not just what to do, but how to think. She didn't give them the answer. She showed them how to find it themselves. By the end, their expressions had transformed from confusion to dawning comprehension. "Try it again," she said, stepping back. This time they moved differently. More fluid, more adaptive, their approach incorporating the terrain rather than fighting against it. When they successfully completed the exercise, their surprise was palpable. "That's how you held the valley," one of them said in sudden understanding. "That's how you stopped 400 Taliban with a single M249. You didn't just fight harder, you fought smarter." Megan didn't confirm or deny. She simply nodded to the instructor and turned to leave. But as she walked away, something had shifted inside her. Seeing the transformation in those young operators, from frustrated adherence to doctrine to creative problem-solving, had answered her question. Her approach could be taught. Not easily, perhaps, and not to everyone. But for those with the right mindset, the right preparation, the willingness to see beyond conventional boundaries, the impossible could become possible. Later that day, she found Hargrove in her office. "I'll do it," Megan said without preamble. Hargrove looked up from her paperwork. "The training program?" "Yes, with conditions." "Name them." "I select the candidates personally. I design the curriculum without interference. And I maintain operational status. No full-time classroom assignment." Hargrove considered, then nodded. "Agreed. When do you want to start?" "I already have." 6 months later, a new unit existed within Special Operations Command. Officially designated Advanced Tactical Solutions Group, unofficially known as Calloway's Impossibles. 12 operators, hand-selected by Megan herself, trained in methodology that defied conventional tactical thinking. Their mission: to solve the problems no one else could, to go where others couldn't, to succeed when failure was considered inevitable. On a rare, clear evening, Megan stood on the observation deck overlooking the training grounds, watching her team execute a scenario of staggering complexity. Their movements were fluid, adaptive, their approach bearing her unmistakable influence while remaining uniquely their own. Hargrove joined her, silently observing for several minutes before speaking. "You've created something remarkable here, Calloway. Something that will outlast both of us." Megan didn't respond immediately, her attention still focused on the team below. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "It's not about creating a legacy. It's about saving lives. Every operator who learns to see beyond conventional boundaries is another impossible mission that becomes possible. Another team that comes home safely. Another objective achieved without unnecessary sacrifice." Hargrove studied her profile. "You never wanted recognition, did you?" "Not even after the Valley. Not even after holding off 400 Taliban single-handedly, with a fallen SEAL's weapon." "Recognition doesn't matter," Megan replied. "Results do. Yet your name has become synonymous with a certain kind of excellence. Pulling a Calloway is now shorthand for achieving the impossible against overwhelming odds." A ghost of a smile touched Megan's lips. "Language evolves. I can't control that." Below them, her team successfully completed the scenario, achieving the objective in half the time allotted. Their satisfaction was evident even from a distance. Not boisterous celebration, but the quiet pride of professionals who had met their own exacting standards. "You know what I find most remarkable about you, Calloway?" Hargrove said after a moment. "It's not your tactical brilliance or your physical courage, impressive as those are. It's that you never seem to doubt. Even when facing seemingly impossible odds, you move forward with absolute certainty." Megan turned to face her fully. "That's a misconception. I doubt all the time. I question every approach, every assumption, every variable. Doubt is essential to finding the right solution. Then what makes you different? Why can you act decisively when others hesitate?" "Because I've already considered every alternative," Megan said simply. By the time I act, I've eliminated every option except the one most likely to succeed. It's not absence of doubt. It's thoroughness of preparation. Hargrove nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You make the impossible possible by refusing to accept the premise of impossibility in the first place. Exactly. Impossible usually just means we haven't found the right approach yet. As they turned to leave, Hargrove asked one final question. Do you ever think about that day in the valley? About what might have happened if you hadn't been there? Megan was quiet for a moment before answering. I don't dwell on hypotheticals. What happened, happened. What matters is what we learned from it. And what did you learn, Calloway? Megan's gaze was steady, her voice quiet but certain. That sometimes the most important factor in any mission isn't technology, or numbers or firepower. It's having the right person, in the right place, with the right mindset. Someone who sees what others miss. Someone willing to stand when others fall back. A pause. Someone who understands that impossible is just a word, not a verdict. The legacy of Megan Calloway would not be found in medals she never sought or recognition she never needed. It would live in the operators she trained, in the missions that succeeded against impossible odds, in the lives saved by those who learned to see as she saw. They doubted her skills until she used a Navy SEAL's M249 to hold off 400 Taliban. But the true measure of her impact wasn't in that singular act of courage. It was in how she transformed the very concept of what was possible, not just for herself, but for all who followed, in the quiet dedication of preparation, in the disciplined focus of execution, in the unwavering commitment to mission before self. These were Megan Calloway's true weapons, far more powerful than any machine gun. And these were the gifts she passed on, not through grandiose speeches or self-promotion, but through consistent example and quiet excellence. For those who understood, who truly saw, the message was clear. The greatest victories often belong to those who never needed to be seen, who never asked for acclaim, who simply did what was necessary when it mattered most. Sometimes, true heroism lies not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Not in what we claim to be, but in what we do when everything depends on us. Not in the recognition we receive, but in the lives we change through our actions. That was Megan Calloway's truth. That was her legacy. And it would endure long after the story of one impossible stand against 400 Taliban fighters had faded into history. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.